Welcome to the Quarantine Chronicles, and today we'll be discussing sports science, fitness and sport podcasts you can watch during the lockdown.
But to follow, I'm sinking faster, yeah. I'm sinking faster into the deep. In this way, I'm sinking in this silence.
So why podcasts? Podcasts have been increasing exponentially over the last few years. Yes, they had a slow start. It was one of those weird places on the internet. Are you really doing podcasts? When video in that is getting lower in terms of the average view duration, now that depends on the type of content. Certain types of content, like the audio, people generally want to listen for longer. And if you're going off to work, for instance, or a run, you might want to listen to something that is long and in detail. And you hear the kind of amateurish, the personalities. It's not as clean cut as short form content. It's more in depth, more in detail than short form content, which is more like a quick flash in the pan. Podcast is one that have been most taken in by the sports science community, the mostly adopted by them. It's seen as the most creditable form in certain circumstances. And with the current lockdowns in place, it's only set to increase drastically because of it. Now, these next two podcasts, although not specifically related to sports science, they are the OGs of the podcast universe, interviewing famous people from sports scientists down to athletes themselves. Firstly, that is the Joe Rogan Experience, and secondly, that's Brian from Real London. If you're looking for an all-purpose sports science podcast, then I recommend Supporting Champions by Steve Ingram. He utilises his own experiences and the experiences of his guests to help improve the provision athletes get by helping to improve the knowledge base of those of sports science, but this time in the real world. Now, if you are a sports coach itself, then I recommend Coach Your Best Performance by Jeremy Boon. Jeremy Boon focuses on coach-athlete buy-in, the dyadic relationships between the athletes, as well as other various psychological and sociological factors regarding coaching practice. He asks quality coaching questions, which allows the time for the athletes to express, and he really knows when he needs to talk and when he really needs to shut up. In terms of psychology, and now I'm going to be very biased in mentioning this because I actually do work for them in a voluntary basis, and that is the DSEP Northern Hub's Talking Psych podcast, where we interview psychologists, athletes and coaches on how they utilise sports psychology within their own practices and how they manage to get into that role. In terms of biomechanics, I recommend Boom! Biomechanics on Our Mind by Hannah O'Day and Melissa Bow, who started this podcast doing their PhDs at Stanford University. They specifically talk about research, and their guests talk about their own research from around the world. Keir Wilhelm-Flatt, the Rugby coaching podcast, is a strength and conditioning podcast. He specifically focuses about his own practice within working for different rugby clubs. It's great because he asks quality questions, not only of his guests, but when he's on his own, to himself, that aids self-reflection, critical self-reflection that is in depth, that if you're watching long form, it's great listening to. Often listening to him, you end up asking more questions of your own practice than when you started with. Sometimes in sports science, there is no actual answer. One for all you long-standing strength conditioning coaches. It's an oldie on the podcast world, and that is the Strength Coach podcast. In terms of running, and running is a highly popular niche within the podcasting industry, not just on social media alone. Runner's World podcast is probably the most popular out the lot, definitely the most commercial as well. Running for Real by Tina Muir is another one which focuses on the specific issues from her own personal point, because she was an international athlete whose career was greatly affected, and she talks about the mental health issues, women issues, as well as injury, heavily within her own podcasts, which mar in with her own experiences of athletics. The next one is quite an interesting gimmick. It's called the Running Commentary, and it is literally what it states. Two blokes and occasional guest doing a podcast while running. You did hear that right. That was literally someone running and and recording a podcast at the same time. So when they do 40 minutes and state you can do a run for 40 minutes and listen to it, they are in fact literally telling the truth. Now, when talking about your general sport podcast and wanting to learn about sports, BBC Sport Hour, they cover the sport round the world within 1 hour, as the name suggests. Another one by the BBC is the Peter Crouch podcast. Very much often go off topic, which may be really annoying to some, but for others it really shows their personality and they have a good laugh while they're doing it. But it's basically one guy and a guest interviewing Peter Crouch about his career, about what's it like retiring, being an athlete, and the different things you have to do in being an elite athlete who is highly paid. The next one, for all those who are interested in American sports in particular, it's quite an amateurish one, but that's part of its charm. That is Rum Boys, and they have two podcasts in particular. Robbie J or Rum Boys has After Dark and also the Rum Report. Now, these particular podcasts are really good because they're often laid back. Sometimes they'll be having a drink while they do the podcast. And it's for those who really want in-depth analysis regarding American sports without all these snoozy wearing a suit kind of thing. It's for those who really like bar, pub style talks regarding sport. Now, for all you personal trainers out there looking to potentially improve their own practice, but also to improve their marketing ability, then Lauren Tinker's Impact School may be for you. Unlike quite a lot of people who say they're making money, it's not like, hey, look at how much I earn 7-figure business and you could do the same. Well done. I'm trying to clap my arm, but it's just not working. Just give them a good clap. I don't know, maybe just do that. Slap them around the face with a salmon. Yeah, sometimes I just really want to slap people around the face with a salmon. Apparently you earn 7 figures, great, but how's that supposed to impact me, you just boasting off about how much you earn? What she tries to do, she focuses on one part of marketing in terms of your personal training and focus heavily on that whilst getting people in who have degrees and business study understandings on how to implement them potentially for your own business. But with her, it's no guarantees. It's all, this could work, but sometimes this doesn't. You have to utilize what's individually good for your own business. Currently, 1 in 8 people listen to a podcast. That's 71%, roughly 2.4 million people within inside the UK. This is expected to more than double over the next 5 years, according to Ofcom. 22% of people who own smart speakers will often listen to this type of content. The most engaged within podcasts will often listen to about 7 different types of podcasts. There are new forms of podcasts called hybrid casts, which intermix and intermatch different types of podcasting formats. Podcasts are quite popular because they are often raw. A hybrid casts aren't generally raw. They'll have a raw section followed up maybe by some music, maybe by some clean videos, an intro, content, whatever. You can name it. That's basically what a hybrid cast is. What kind of podcasts are you personally listening to? Whack that down in the comments below. And is there anything that you would recommend personally that maybe I have missed off this list?
I'm sinking faster, I'm sinking faster into